Okay, friends, welcome back. In the first part of Chapter 9 video presentation, we spent a lot of time discussing the so-called SDLC framework. Now, SDLC, as you well know by now, is a highly structured waterfall approach to developing information systems. And we spent a lot of time discussing each of the phases and steps within those phases under the SDLC methodology. Now, I told you before that SDLC framework is something that is very central to the field of management information systems or computer information systems. In fact, some theorists, some scholars go as far as saying that this is something that defined the entire field. Meaning some experts, they argue that the entire field of information system is largely about that. It's about doing work in those 3 phases or 8 steps that were discussed previously. Now, unfortunately, over time, the SDLC framework has lost some of its popularity. Before we talked about some, advantages and disadvantages of SDLC. Now, I would say the central criticism that caused the SDLC framework to lose some of its popularity is that it's just not realistic because it does not account for evolving requirements during projects. In other words, people are saying that life is just too complex, there's a lot of change, things change, so you cannot just hope to formally define user requirements and then, freeze those requirements, because it's not how life works, it's not how organizations work, it's not how business works. In other words, things change and you need to be able to accommodate some of those changes. Another point of criticism that is not as central but is important is that sometimes users, ultimately information systems are built for end users, for business users, but sometimes business users, they're simply not in a good position to formulate good specific requirements towards an information system. Now that has to do with the fact that it's something probably related to the way human brain works. We can think about specific things. But we're not good when it comes to creating something from nothing, meaning somebody just asks you, well, why don't you formulate your requirements toward the system? That would be quite difficult. So in response to this criticism, or to address those 2 gaps that I just discussed, a number of alternative approaches to developing information systems have been proposed. Now, personally, I would say that we're going to discuss a number of alternative approaches, and in this specific part of our video presentation, we'll talk about prototyping. But I would say that most of the methods, most of the modern methods, most of the alternatives to SDLC, they can, it can be said that they fall within this prototyping or agile, development philosophy. So there are different names like rapid application development, extreme programming, prototyping. But I think all of those methodologies can be included under one common term, which is agile. I would say it's #1 term, and then maybe prototyping. So first of all, let's talk about prototyping, the idea behind prototyping. It's an evolutionary, gradual, iterative development process. It enables creation of system quickly, right? But that system is a prototype, and then the system is revised after initial trials by users. So in other words, you don't develop a system using that waterfall approach where you have, where first you define requirements and then you step by step you implement those requirements. First, you come up with a system, with a rough draft, with a prototype. Then you show this draft, this prototype to users, and then they give you feedback, and based on that feedback you create second draft, and then third draft, fourth draft, and so forth. So this is like an iterative approach. You do it gradually, as opposed to starting with detailed specifications and then completing the entire project at once. Prototyping takes advantage of fourth-generation procedural languages and relational databases management system. Basically, it takes advantage of all those new technologies that allow somebody, a developer, to rapidly construct those prototypes without spending too much time writing actual code. It can be used as a complete alternative to SDLC, or it can be used within an SDLC process. So in other words, practicing prototyping does not necessarily mean abandoning that standard SDLC approach. Again, the argument that proponents of prototyping have as to why this method is better than SDLC or waterfall approach is that it's more realistic. This is how humans work. I mean, if you think about it, if you think about any kind of creative endeavor, let's say the way artists work, let's say the way painters work, I mean, they never start with a detailed sketch of a painting and then just go like inch by inch, adding details. That's not how they work. I mean, if you ever observed how painters work, they always start with some kind of very rough sketch, and then based on that rough sketch, they add some, very high-level details. Then they look at it. If they like it, they keep adding details. If they don't like it, they discard it or they start over again. So some people say that this is more realistic when it comes to creating information system solution, especially when you do it from scratch, when there's a lot of uncertainty, when you're not sure in the first place what exactly needs to be created. Now there can be several types of prototypes. One type of a prototype that you can create is first of a series. It's a completely operational prototype used as a pilot or selected features. So basically, it means like it's a rough draft of an information system, but it's operational. It does at least some of the work that the information system is supposed to do, and then based on feedback, you improve it even further. Or you can have a selected feature prototype. Only some essential features are included, and then more details are added later on. I think this one is more common, selected feature prototype. Prototyping steps. So this is how prototyping works. First, you identify basic requirements. In other words, you don't spend too much time here. Again, the assumption here is that it's impossible to identify all the requirements from scratch. And then even if you do that, they will change. So there's no point in spending a lot of time during the requirements gathering stage, which is in contrast with SDLC, where the assumption is that you need to spend a lot of time defining requirements because you'll end up implementing them. So based on those rough requirements, you develop an initial prototype, and then you basically use this prototype to show it to the users. And then you get their feedback, and then the desired changes, and then you revise this prototype and you present it again. So you may spend a lot of time circling here, and this also allows to add new requirements. So each loop can accommodate new requirements based on that session of prototype demonstration. So a lot of time is spent here, and then eventually, after several iterations, you will say, okay, we'll go. We're happy with the existing prototype, and we launch it. So you evaluate it as operational system, make necessary modifications or abandon, and then basically you try to install it, and then if it works, it's good. If it doesn't work, if there are some errors, you fix them. You make necessary modifications, and then you go live. In other words, you install that information system as the system that is operated throughout the organization. So once again, a lot of time is spent here, just going through iterations here. What are typical project team compositions under the prototyping methodology? Well, obviously you need to have technical workers, meaning IS or IT team members, but also you need to have business users participating as well. There's an idea that technical and non-technical users participating together can add value, because ultimately, of course, system is built from a technical standpoint, but it's built for business users. So that's why participation of business users is essential. Well, speaking, I would like to say a few more words about team composition. I mean, I observed that under prototyping, or should I say Scrum or Agile methodology, a lot of attention is paid not only to team composition but also to office space. For example, some startup software companies, they would make sure that nobody has a separate office, that all workers, meaning technical and non-technical users, meaning like marketing people, research staff, people who do research about consumer preferences, finance people, tech support, and also obviously developers, they're all co-located. It's in one big hall. Of course, there are areas like devoted specifically to IT support, specifically to marketing, but they're all collaborating in one single space. And this is done to ensure collaboration on creating those prototypes, because the idea here, even finance people, even marketing people should have an opportunity to provide input after a prototype is demonstrated to them. So you can seal project team composition not only in terms of formally defining roles, but also in terms of locating them in a specific order in an office space. So what are some of the advantages of the prototyping methodology? Well, first of all, you don't spend too much time defining requirements. Again, the assumption here, it may be useless, so only basic requirements are needed at the beginning. So I told you it's it's something, this kind of approach is frequently used in creative work, and to translate it to information system context, this approach is highly applicable when you're doing something creative, something that will radically change the way people work. So in that case, you may want to go through several iterations so that people are not shocked, they're not paralyzed, and they give you feedback at each of those stages. It's also helpful with when you're exploring new technology, so that users and IT specialists, they get a feel. Once you build a prototype, they get a feel of the new system, and then then they're in a better position to improve it. Working system is available for testing more quickly. You don't, one of the worst situation in IS development is when when your project turns into the so-called vaporware. In other words, for years you are developing something and users have no idea what you're developing, and the delivery deadline keeps getting pushed, and then after several years you show them what you develop and they're like, that's not what we wanted. That's a completely different product. So that prototyping approach eliminates that possibility. Less strong top-down commitment needed at front end, meaning users, they're active participants. They give you active feedback at all stages. Cost and benefits can be better approximated after experience with initial prototype, and initial user acceptance is likely to be higher because, again, user input is used at every iteration to produce new prototypes. So they're giving plenty of opportunities to provide feedback. Okay, so what are the disadvantages of prototyping? Well, under this method, the final product may lack security and control features needed for the final system because there is no high-level architecture planning. It's all kind of, in a way, it's like ad hoc. Like additional things are added based on user requirements, which is good in terms of taking into account user requirements. But this may not be as good in terms of ensuring the overall structural integrity of a system. May not undergo rigorous testing because, again, it's done quickly through those quick iterations, and sometimes, if you're trying to do those iterations quickly, you don't have enough time frame, you don't have enough opportunity to really test, each version, each prototype. Final documentation may be less complete because, again, the emphasis is on speed, on taking into account different changing requirements, and not on cementing and documenting those requirements. It also may be difficult to manage user expectations. I mean, if you think about it, one good thing about SDLC is that there is a formal end to the requirement stage. In other words, at some point you can say, look, we're done with the requirements. We're not accepting any more requirements towards the system. Under prototyping, it's not like that. Requirements can come in at any time, so that may create a somewhat unrealistic expectations from users where they feel that anything can be changed or anything can be added. So that's something that makes project management a bit difficult. Now, as I told you before, prototyping does not have to be like something like a contradiction to SDLC. It can be used within SDLC. More specifically, prototyping can be used within the definition phase to help users define system requirements, and also based on the pilot to refine those system requirements. So basically, you can do prototyping during the definition phase, and after those requirements are defined, you proceed with the standard phases or steps under the SDLC methodology. So not necessarily there's a contradiction. You can easily embed prototyping within the SDLC framework. Okay, friends, so this concludes part 7 of our video presentation. Thank you for listening.